One Andrew Bitley, called Andrew Bitting, Andrew, and another is Deepankar Gupta. Andrew did his work in 1960s, whereas Deepankar Gupta wrote about contemporary Indian villages. We are going to use the account of these two people to have a better understanding of what is going on in the villages. And more importantly, what is the role of village studies in sociology or anthropology? Why are village studies important? Okay. Here we are going to examine polity, economy, religion, classes, caste, all the dimensions. Okay, classes, caste, religion, all aspects. Okay. Let us first discuss Andrew's account of a village during 60s. Okay. Let me ask you a few basic questions. Which village did he study?
Shripuram.
Sripuram. What was his teacher? Who was his teacher?
M.N. Srinivas.
M.N. Srinivas. Okay. Why was, I mean, from which part was Andrew?
Bengal.
Bengal. How did he get this name, Andrew Bethel? How? What is his origin?
French father, Bengali
French
mother.
father. French father and Indian mother. Hybrid. Okay. Okay. So, what was the purpose of M.N. Srinivas sending him to Tamil village? Sunil, you didn't switch on the audio.
To study the village, sir.
But why should he send a Bengali to Tamil unless to
that-
torture him?
So that he doesn't have any kind of biasness or affinity.
Okay. Moreover, in anthropology, this comes under anthropology as well as sociology. I'll tell you why. In anthropology, field work is important. Field work is to go to some other place and stay there and observe field work. Okay. And usually anthropologists go to distant lands, usually to very simple societies, and when they don't even know their language. Okay. So here, somebody from a Bengali is sent to Tamil village where he doesn't know the language. So he will have to make out without learning the language and of course learning a little bit of language. That is part of anthropological tradition, not so much of sociology, that's more of anthropology. Andrew will be considered anthropologist also as well as sociologist. M.N. Srinivas is considered sociologist in India, but anthropologist outside. Why village is considered both anthropology and sociology? Village is a simple society. So anthropology is the study of simple societies. So that is why village studies come under anthropology. Village studies also come under sociology because sociology has to study, Indian sociology has to study Indian society, and village is an important part of Indian society. Okay. And also village studies are important in sociology in the sense that through village, you can understand how a society is working, how Indian society is working. Through village, you can understand how Indian society is working. It is like a microcosm of Indian society. Okay, what things are happening in Indian village? From them, you can understand what is the nature of Indian society and how Indian society is changed. Okay. So not knowing the native language, not learning much in advance, is supposed to make it closer to anthropological investigation and also free from bias. Okay, give the spirit of what is closer to anthropological investigation. So that was how Andrew went. And what was the framework he used? But tell me, what was his academic stage when he went to Sripuram? Was he a professor?
So after
No.
the studies, he did his PhD. PhD was a part of
He
it.
was doing PhD work. It was part of his PhD work. Okay. So do you see one student's PhD became a lesson? Okay. Of course. Probably because he accomplished many things after that. If he remained only as a student and then did something else, he did that as a student and did something else later. Maybe this work would not have been important. Okay. And also because he was working under ML Srinivas. So, what was the framework he used to understand Sripuram? Theoretical framework he used to understand Sripuram.
Weberian framework.
Unmute. Huh? Weberian framework.
Yeah.
Weberian framework. Okay. He used Weberian framework. That's true. Can you tell me briefly what is that Weberian framework?
Caste, class,
Hmm.
and third thing, I don't know. I can't. Caste, studying in terms of
Three words in his
three
article.
dimensions.
He didn't exactly. He didn't use the word caste, but he used three words in his article.
Mm.
Class. What is the second word?
Class, no.
Class, status, and power.
Okay, got it.
Class, status, and power. Okay.
Status and power.
Status and power. Those three were the general words Andrew used. Class, status, and power. Okay. What he wanted to say as a modification to Marxism was that Marx thought of only class. Marx thought of only one dimension, and that was class. Whereas Weber thought there should be three dimensions. Those three dimensions include class, status, and power. Class was an economic dimension, and status was social dimension, and power was political dimension. Okay, class, status, and power. One was economic dimension, another was status dimension, social dimension, and another was power dimension.
So,
So
status was economic dimension.
no, class was economic dimension. Class, status, and power. He used these three words: class, status, and power.
Okay.
Class, status, and power. Class, economic dimension, and status, dimension. Power,
Okay.
power dimension. Difference between status and power is status is given by others. Status is something given by others. Whereas power is, if you don't obey the power, there will be punishment. For example, teachers and doctors, you can say they have status and not power. But an officer has power. Okay. Power means get things done despite resistance. Power is getting things done despite resistance. Getting things done despite resistance is power. So in a caste system, some people thought some caste may have an economic power, but Brahmins have highest status, and some other caste may have political power. So basically, he thought of economy, political, and status dimension. Status refers to respect, honor, and things like that. Respect, honor, not forcing on the other. Status is about not forcing. Power is forcing. When somebody is not doing, you can extract things. That's power. And class economic dimension. So Weber thought there are 3 dimensions to stratification: class, status, and power. Three dimensions to stratification: class, status, and power. Okay, and which means that his viewpoint is to think that economy determines everything is wrong. To think that economy determines everything. Okay, that is, higher class will have higher status and higher power would be wrong. Some people may have more resources, high class. Some others will have high status, and some others will have higher power. So economy wise, one kind of layering will come, power wise, another kind of layering, and status wise, entirely different kind of layering. Stratification is about layers. Okay, layers of stratification. So Andrew went with the orientation that economy and status and power need not match. They can be different. Unlike in Marxian account. Unlike in Marxian account, economy and power and status need not match. That's what he went with. And he found in that village of Sripuram, these 3 are not matching. That is the point. That is the theory. So economy and power and status are not matching. That is what Andrew found. So tell me, who are the land, to which caste that landlords in Sripuram belong?
Brahmins.
Brahmins. That was unusual. In most villages, Brahmins were not landlords. Brahmins were only doing rituals. Landlords belong to some other caste. But in that village of Sripuram, Brahmins themselves were landlords. Probably they got a grant from a ruler. Okay, that's what you see in certain agraharams. They're Brahmin villages, and the land may have been given as part of a grant. So Brahmins landlords means Brahmins had the highest status and they had the land, and definitely because they had the highest economic power, that was land, they would also get political power. So Andrew argues at one time these Brahmins had economic power, political power, and highest status. By 1960s, things were changing. These Brahmins, land power went down. Land power went down meant economic power went down. economic power went down. Political power, okay, economic power went down. And with economic power, political power also would come down, but certain other things were changing. And status also was not so high. It is here Andrew discusses what was going on outside Sripuram. He was talking about 60s, which means land reforms took place by 60s. Because of land reforms, Land Ceiling Act was passed and many had to lose land, which means the amount of land lost. And then after that, land fragmentation took place. Okay, land given to their children and children, like that, land fragmentation. So basically, land holding came down. That was one. And then because it was Sripuram is in Tamil Nadu, because of anti-Brahmin movement launched by Periyar as we discussed, Brahmin power itself came down because of anti-Brahmin movement of Periyar. And then another thing is that because of Panchayat Raj system, Panchayat Raj meant election of a Sarpanch. People have to vote. And some people outside Sripuram could influence politics in Sripuram. You know, currently village politics is influenced by MLAs and MPs, political parties like that. So Panchayati Raj uh, attacks the monopoly of power held by one person. So traditionally that power was held by one person who had maximum land. But what Panchayati Raj did was it brought competitive power politics to the village. If one family was dominant, there would be rival family that would question this family. Isn't it so? So by 60s, he was saying Brahmins were losing economic power and political power. Economic power because of land, political power because of Panchayat Raj. And even the status was coming down because of anti-Brahmin movement. So at one time, land meant higher caste status, political power, and economic power. But according to Andrew, those things were gone. It was dispersal of the three dimensions of stratification. Okay. Tell me, what do you know about your own village, and whether you what can you say about your own village, or any idea you have, any village you have idea of? Vishal, you want to say something? You just tell me how you understand Andrew's experience.
Andrew's experience is something intermixture of Weber and Indological studies, if I can say so.
Okay.
Because he took Weber's framework and practically studied the Indian village. So, and particularly after the independence and the land reforms were taken, and by the way, it was in the south, which, as you mentioned, was had a completely different social structure because of Dravidian movements. So it was completely a different one, which
Compared to your village, any idea you have? You are from?
well, I am a local. My father worked in central government, so I roamed around the country all these years. So whatever my father used to say, well,
Grandparents, your
sir,
grandparents, your grandparents.
my father is from Warangal actually.
Okay.
So he used to say this. Actually, we are from a higher class, so they were landlords.
Okay.
But in the meanwhile, they had to sell their land because of some reasons.
Why do we
Uh,
need Andrew? You please tell me about your father.
well, my father, I don't know
Your
about.
father, your father could not have been landlord. Your father's father, grandfather.
My father's father was a landlord, yes, but uh, for a time, my father had
Was managing.
experienced that.
Okay.
Yeah, like they were brothers.
Uh, I don't know about your particular, I mean, I cannot say, but in Warangal district, some landlords used to hold hundreds of acres.
I don't know about the land size,
Okay.
but my father, I don't know the numbers, but my father used to say it was vast that uh, from one end to other end we were tired traveling like that.
My God. Okay.
So he experienced all those things. Unfortunately, I
That is
don't have
also an
all.
interesting way of measuring land, it seems.
uh,
Okay.
so he used to mention this that they had in Telugu he used this palegallu. I am not sure.
Polygons.
I don't know
Okay.
what. I guess it.
Uh,
They are workers. It
mm,
seems.
mm. See, for the fact that Vishal doesn't know anything about this itself is an aspect of social change.
And
He
individualistic
doesn't
thing.
know
My
the land
father.
size. See,
No, my father worked in CRPF, so I wasn't in Hyderabad
okay.
for many years.
Mm.
My
That's true.
childhood went
That's true.
all
I'm
over
saying
the.
all these are part of social change. Grandson is so different from grandfather. Okay. Then what happened to land? In land sealing, you may have lost so much.
I guess like my grandfather's brothers had shared the land, it seems,
Okay.
and my father's father, because at that time he was a headmaster. I
Okay.
think that was a high level during those times,
Sure, sure.
being a headmaster.
Yes.
My father says it.
Mm.
Uh, so he rejected his property because he wanted his brothers to
Okay.
grow.
Okay.
Uh, so on the other side, my grandmother, grandmother too had,
Mm.
but they sold their property
Okay.
in the recent decade, I guess.
Okay. Okay.
In the
Okay.
1960s, I guess. I don't know.
Okay.
Uh, well, he used to also say that his uncle, his maternal uncle,
Mm.
uh, too had a farm, and the lower castes were treated very horribly, it seems.
Mm. Mm.
So, like, uh, many of the abusive words were
Mm.
uh, like, I don't know, uh, like if those people didn't work or uh, came late to the work, they were treated very harshly, it
Yes.
seems.
Yes. Yes.
So
Yes.
these are all. That's not a practical thing for me, but yes,
That's true.
my father used to tell me.
That's true. So at that time, I mean, Telangana case was much, much worse. Okay, Telangana was much, much worse. Huge land and economic power and dominant caste, and the entire village would be under that control. Okay, many villages also, and many people would work. Telangana case is very, very bad. Warangal, like that. That gave rise to Naxalism and other things later. Okay, but what Andrew was saying is that was a general picture. There were some land, and from land, political power also came, and unchallenged, because others did not have any opportunities to challenge. So what happened was that land power declined, land reforms and fragmentation. People moved to urban areas. Basically, land power declined. And then, due to Panchayat Raj, political systems outside percolated the village and undermined the political power of the people who had land, which means land size declined And Panchayat Raj undermined politics, undermined political power. Okay. And caste system itself undermined. That's different. But basically, Andrew was saying that land as the source of status and also power has declined because it dispersed. It dispersed. Some people might have power without having land, and some people would have land, and Brahmins might have status. So dispersal took place. So you can say one very important change in post-independent India is the decline in the power of land. One very sweeping change. Like when we were discussing gender, woman empowerment as one sweeping change, you can say one important change in village is decline in the power of land. Landowners had everything and they had lots of land. Such a situation is gone. Nikhil, your experience from the villages that you toured
Yes,
as
sir.
a worker, volunteer.
Yes, sir. And here too, it is also about the like Schedule 5 and the FRA, which so right now also like the communities like Birhor and Tanabagar, they didn't have land. They didn't have any land at all. So right now the government is trying to provide them some land through Forest Rights Act. And
Now, are you familiar with any village in which there used to be landlords? We're not talking about tribal hamlets. That's a different case. We'll discuss later.
so that is
Are
my
you
own
familiar with
village.
the villages? Definitely, there were villages in Bihar, erstwhile Bihar, um, where there used to be landlords with huge land and controlled everything.
So that will be, sir, my own village actually, the place where I come from. So
Okay.
in UP. So the Jamindar actually now they are very close friend of my father somehow.
Okay.
So I keep visiting their Haveli also, which is
Okay.
as big as like
Haveli means one big.
the mansion they have, which is as big
See,
as like some.
in Warangal also you see such places, one big mansions.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they had enormous lands, enormous. Like in fact, after the land reform only they distributed the land among the Brahmins and the Kshatriyas, which were like the people who were actually serving them. Some land went to the lower caste also, but very little.
See, land is basically they gave to in the Binami name sometimes, and after that, to whom they gave, they became the owners later. They gave it to, for example, Brahmins and Kshatriyas. They were not supposed to give, but they gave distributed like that, and then they became leaders. So they were forced to distribute, and sometimes even if they didn't distribute, land fragmentation ensured that there was not much of a land. So can you tell me, Nikhil, what is that family doing now?
So very interesting actually, sir. So because we are like very close with them, so we know them quite well. So they had four sons, like they entered in politics, and the only way they are surviving is by selling the lands. So they frequently keep selling the land, and they get crores of rupees. And one of like his daughter is studying in US, and they sold a piece of land to send her to US. So like very interesting family actually. No one does anything; they just do politics and like they are surviving
So
on
that is
that.
the status. And lands coming into crores is a particularly recent phenomenon. But otherwise, land value, less land fragmentation, that was what happened. Basically, they lost power, isn't it so? At one time, they had everything.
But one more interesting thing, sir, I have observed in their family is that like the whole status and power and the whole the way they used to behave, that still remains in the family.
Exactly.
So they will call like they will have like multiple servants and they will just call them the way they used to call in the history. So all
That's
this loyalty
so
still remains.
substance is gone.
Yeah.
Substance is gone. Yes, like old Raja style. Mhm. That's true. Okay. These are the changes. So essentially, the power of land reforms, land fragmentation, and politicization, and caste system itself undermined. So villages have been completely changed. So that is the shift. At one time, land meant everything. Land brought everything. But later, dispersal. Okay. Next, we'll come to contemporary situation when we do Deepankar Gupta. Okay. Deepankar Gupta is talking about villages of 21st century, current villages. Okay. Deepankar Gupta's account is not based on the study of any one village on the basis of his field work, but he is making an observation on many villages, Punjab and UP and other places. Okay. What he is saying is that first land power hugely down. But what Deepankar Gupta is looking at is that what are the social implications? He is saying when land power is coming down, it is weakening the caste hierarchy. Because who supported the caste hierarchy? Upper caste. And what power did upper caste have? Land. So he is saying that land power was the basis of authority in the caste hierarchy. And when the land power is gone, the control system is gone. Okay. The terms, he's saying still they use the terms, but they don't have the power. But at one time they had the terms, they had power, and others would shiver. Okay, that was the extent. So caste hierarchy, rules of untouchability, domination, all that was pinned by land power. And with land power gone, caste system is diluted. That is the link that Deepankar Gupta is bringing about. Okay, caste and land are linked. That's one thing. And second thing, Deepankar Gupta is talked about, which did not happen in 1960s when Andrew was studying, was that agriculture has become hopelessly unremunerated as of now. 40 acres, 50 acres, they're not yielding any money. Agricultural crisis is a very serious issue in India. Landlords, even if there are some, get very little from the land. Cost has gone up, prices not remunerative, too many borewells, water table down, fertilizers, pesticides, and agriculture has become like a gamble. And many middle level and lower middle level are committing suicides. So at the center of this crisis, which we will discuss also in detail, is environmental degradation. Fertilizer use, pesticide use, land quality down, water table down, okay, land destroyed, and no marketing help, and unseasonal rains. So with things like climate change, agriculture is going to face even more serious problems, highly unpredictable, resource destruction. And remember, at around the same time, other areas are picking up so fast, also relative. Other areas are picking up so fast, people are earning a lot, and crores and crores, lakhs and lakhs, highly remunerative jobs, and agriculture nowhere. Which means relatively even more, agriculture has become completely unprofitable. So many people leaving to urban occupations. And this leaving to urban occupations means agriculture down, caste hierarchy down, that is one. But for the lower caste, it all represented opportunities. Lower caste can take up to urban occupations. or what is called a non-farm employment and get more money, which means things are unfavorable to the landlords in two ways. Number one, their own sources of income dwindling, and then the sources of income for the people at the lower level increasing, which means non-land based opportunities increasing and land based opportunities dwindling. And when land was the thing that pinned the caste hierarchy, land power down and increase in power to non-land or non-farm employment would completely upset the caste balance, and that's what is happening. A clerk would earn so much compared to a landlord. Agriculture became a gamble. And if you see in a village, if one family is decent, do you know its income is not from agriculture? Its income may be coming from the children who are employed elsewhere, maybe in a government, maybe engineers, doctors, or went to US. Income is not coming from agriculture at all. Can you throw light on this issue, Vishal, if you know anything? Nikhil? Basically, I'm asking, what is the status of farmers' incomes? Sweta, you have any idea of agriculture? Your
Yes, my maternal side, my grandfather or grandmother, like they do agriculture. They are in agriculture.
okay.
So it is like, sir, ki, it does not give earning to them, and they have different like job of my maternal uncle gives like some of the income to them so that they can earn a living. So the
That's
condition of the farmers are not so well good. And as we look over the case of today, farmers protest in Delhi.
mm,
That is also due to this because the MSP price and all this, they don't get a proper fair price of their produce,
sure,
and because of this, they have to sell their land.
sure. We will discuss agricultural crisis separately. But it is clear that they don't have incomes.
Yes, they don't have income. The
If
price of
anybody is having some income, it is not from agricultural source.
yes, because they do job, and because of that they earn some income. And it's just like we have second business
Mm,
is it is just like agriculture.
mm. It's like that.
Some additional income could be taken. And
Mm.
in our case also, we have land, agriculture land, and we have given to other people who grow the crops on that, and they give us like little amount of money and take the else
That,
with them.
that's true. And many times they don't give also because because when they are not getting, how will they give? So, do you see in this agricultural crisis, it is not production crisis. It's not that not enough food, not enough consumption. It's livelihood. There are no incomes. So what Dipankar Gupta is doing is, to these economic facts, he is looking at the social implications. What is its impact on caste structure? It is collapsing. You know, caste structure is collapsing not because of ideology and liberty, equality, fraternity. It is because of land. Just collapse. Land was everything. Now it is nothing. So what is happening to the land is a sweeping source of, or a source of sweeping social change that is going on in India's villages. Okay. So much that the old issue of landlord versus laborers is not an issue now, because all farmers are suffering. That is why it became farmers' issue. Earlier, during the freedom struggle, people used to think in terms of landlord versus. That is why some of the things that Naxalites are fighting, they don't have much substance. I mean, at least certain things changed. That landlord versus thing and laborer is not the main issue now. Because the farmers are not making money. In fact, farmers say that laborers are much better. They can go out and work, and what can we do? Okay. So those who are settled in urban occupations, they are fine. But if they're only on land, no hope. So that class conflict within agriculture lost relevance. More important dimension now is rural versus urban dimension. Farmers versus others. Now farmers' protests are becoming important rather than the agricultural laborers' protests. Farmers protest. So rural versus urban dimension. And that has a lot of truth. Do you know so many resources are diverted towards urban areas? Villages don't have water. In Telangana, water pipes to Hyderabad come through many villages where the villages don't have access to water. Cities have electricity, cities have water, cities have so many facilities, and villages were simply sucked out of the resources. There is no focus. So farmers are complaining, what is this kind of development? Rural versus urban. The old thing of class conflict. During the freedom struggle, people thought in terms of landlord versus laborer. That was the socialism. That was land reforms. But now agriculture becomes in such a chaotic situation, so unremunerative, that different issues have emerged. So Deepankar Gupta is saying that agriculture becoming unremunerative is a very serious issue. Okay. See, some people, as she said, that Nikhil also said, they are selling land. Do you know? That is because of modernization. If the farmers are getting land, getting higher price for land, not because that land is going to be used for agricultural purpose, it is for non-agricultural purpose. Somebody is earning money from US and here he buys the land. People are not buying from agricultural income. People are buying from non-agricultural income. So if land value is going up, it is not because of the crops it can grow. It is because on that something else can be built. It is like that. Okay. But then you can say, why can't farmers sell their lands? That is a problem. Farmers do not know what to do after selling the land. So they are scared. In fact, this is one very important issue in Indian economy. People who have land don't know how to use. And people who know how to use the land, they don't have the land. This is the gap. But we can address that gap later. But what is happening now in India's village is that no money. There may be land, but there is no income. Neither they sell the land and get money, nor they get money. They are not even in a position to leave the agriculture because they don't know what else to do. So they keep on doing. They may get something out of it. And if not this year, maybe next year. Like that. That is going on. And so many times, you know why farmers commit suicide? It's about bore wells. They think the water will be there on bore well, but it fails. Next another bore well. 4 or 5 bore wells, each bore well costing around 25 to 30,000. They may have taken a loan, and so many bore wells fail, unremunerated.
Sir, if I may add to this debate,
Please.
In my village, what is happening is, I don't know if it is affecting economy of villages. So people are not ready to work at all. So what is happening is they are getting 2-3 rupees ration. So no one is ready to work at all. They just are looking for the day, what they can get in a day, and that's it. They are not thinking of future or anything. So that is another problem. I mean, no one wants to work in the
That
villages.
is true. No, what you are raising is an important point. But why are they not working? Because they have seen people who are making money are not working. Don't you think our attitude towards work changed? A friend of mine who made lots of money in US, And interestingly, he came to village, and somebody had already bought around 150 acres for some industrial purpose, and this man bought. And now he is the owner of 150 plus acre land, and he's doing agriculture. Very interesting. Left software and everything. Okay. One thing he keeps saying is that he is working. He says that the work culture gone. People are not working. They want to make money in the shortest possible way. And probably NRE is one such facility that it is giving to so many people. Okay. So work culture, hard work, the value for the work is gone. Is right. So this raises the issues. What are we up to? What are we planning to do? And things like that. People want an easy life. Of course, people are working, but working in a mental labor. This is mind-obsessed civilization. We don't use body. And we got strange things. We say we go for walking. What is meant by going for walking? Because otherwise we are not walking. And some people say we're going for running. Why running? Because otherwise we are not walking. Because these are all strange words. I don't think in any civilization people went for a walking. People walked. I don't think they went for walking. And they take a huge car and go to a gym, and then a treadmill they do run. Don't you see the artificiality of all this? Okay, so this is a civilization that lost its balance. That is the point. There's no balance. Okay, definitely, if there is a proper balance, there will be some people who will work and who would love to work on agriculture, who would love to stay in villages. That would be a better society. Not that work and then say after retirement I will work in a village. I will do farming. People will work now. People work in villages and they work for some time and then do software for some other time. That's what Karl Marx talked about. You should fish and you should farm and you should write poetry. That is the way to live. So not only we got into an imbalance in terms of work, we got into imbalance in terms of environmental management. It is that brought this crisis. Resource depletion, land pollution, agriculture became unremunerated. That is a farming crisis. Okay, so Sunil, your observation is right. That's what people are saying. People are not working. Not only people are not working, people are not strong also. People are not strong. Their food habits changed. They eat all kinds of things which is unhealthy. Even poor people eat getting into things like diabetes and many lifestyle disorders, many overeating related disorders. Overeating is also related to not working because you can't really overeat if you are working. So all are related. People are fighting in terms of how to take this small food and be healthy because there's just no work. All mind work only. So this is imbalanced. So attitude towards work. That's why Gandhi believed in manual labor. Gandhi believed that's the purpose, that it's the part of education. Okay. And we have a particular notion of work. That is why we lost respect for agriculture. Okay, we don't feel like going out, doing manual labor, connections with the birds and trees. No, we are connected to ACs. If a person who is somewhat natural, if he enters one MNC office, not MNC office, some Infosys or anything, he can't survive for a few minutes. Do you know that? all closed, all full, well lit. You can't live for a few minutes. But then how are people getting used to do this? Even that itself is source of certain diseases. To get a D, they take D vitamin. To go all kinds of artificial things. So what I'm saying is that there is no balance in our life. Okay, if we respected labor, and not only that, so much of food we eat is poison. Milk, even milk is spoiled. Milk, vegetables, fruits. Even if you want to lead a very healthy lifestyle of vegetables and milk, you can't, because they are also poisoned, polluted. Why should we produce so much, even this pollution? Because people are eating more. They're not eating less. If they eat less, we can produce less, and we don't need to use all these things. And then go for organic farming. So we got our agenda wrong. And what is the net result? Dipankar Gupta's article is not talking about environmental crisis, agricultural crisis, but he is saying that apart from land reforms, land value has come down, agricultural land value has come down, and this has implications to caste structure. He is looking at upper caste who had land and now its worth come down, and looking at the lower caste who did not have but now have more opportunities. Which means caste system is being attacked in two ways. The loss to the upper caste and gain to the lower caste. And this gain to the lower caste is nothing but shift from farm employment to non-farm employment. It is here you see liberalization, globalization, and privatization. Dipankar Gupta is saying that towns are being transformed, villages are being transformed. In a village also, you see many non-agricultural occupations. For example, bunks, tea shops, all kinds of things. Actually, in many villages now, water is scarce, but Pepsi is easily available. Okay, and Pepsi and liquor freely available. Drinking water is difficult. Buttermilk also difficult. So many unhealthy food items also entered. He's saying that non-agricultural things entered, and which means non-agricultural occupations means undermining the system that we discussed, that was Jajmani system. Jajmani system, it pinned various caste groups through permanent and non-cash interactions. Various castes are pinned through permanent and non-cash interactions under Jajmani. But now that Jajmani is undermined. And undermining the Jajmani is helpful for the lower caste, because the lower caste were in a subservient position before. So he is linking how villages are changing because of globalization. Don't think globalization in terms of WTO, IMF. Think of globalization as nothing but industrialization, liberalization, industries going to the villages. How is globalization linked? Because they have to be made for exports, and without exports, many companies won't survive. And where are those exports being made? Closer to villages or in towns where people from the villages are coming. Okay, Nikhil, you have any idea of this non-farm employment?
So non-farm employment, like the other activities like horticulture and other things.
Horticulture, but after horticulture, what are they doing? Anything, any other activity? You can tell me. Any access to handicrafts and any mechanized production?
Actually, here we are actually doing a lot of things like that.
Like what?
So, like, so there is this non-timber forest produce. So
non-timber forest produce.
so that includes chironji. La is a substance where which is found here on the plants.
We will, I think that's more related to tribals. We will discuss that later. But we're discussing village now. Village is different from a tribe. Village is about simple land and no forest. It's like that. Can you tell me how village? We'll discuss tribes later.
Yes, sir.
Do you have any experience of village and transformed through interaction with the town and any manufacturing activities?
Sir, like there is a linkage of farming to so like just an example. So actually, I wanted to mention this when we were discussing this. So
Okay.
I see like farming in two ways. One is like in UP when I see, because the land holding is now very small with people. Mostly people do farming which are like wheat, rice, which can suffice their need, no income motive or anything. That is what I find among the people surrounding me. But here, because farming is something which is evolving, which is coming as a very new thing. Tribals were not into farming at all. So now the farmers who are coming, they are being supported by civil society organization and everything, and they actually have the intention of earning. So like a lot of farmers are doing this sweet corn or watermelon, which are cash crops, and there is a linkage of mother dairy directly, and mother dairy will procure directly, and this kind of, so they are actually earning good money with that, and they are being supported with things like drip farming, sprinkler farming. Though this place has less fertility and less water resources, but still they are earning much more than farmers of UP, which is, I think, not in all cases, but in cases which are being supported and everything. So the type of farming also makes a big difference. And land holding is a bit big here in compared to among the like the people who actually have land, uh, compared to UP where it is very populous and people have very small amount of land. So maybe so the land reform has its con also, which is like people don't have land now, and that is why farmers are.
So Dipankar Gupta is looking at how all these things are undermining the caste. That is the point.
That is very true, sir. That is very true.
Caste being undermined. And then he goes to this issue of religion. Religion. Dipankar Gupta is saying that at certain places, lower castes are taking to newer forms of religion. So again, caste and religion linked. Caste and economy and caste and religion. What is the link? The link is, for example, he gives in Punjab, it seems, lower castes are going for their own gurudwaras, where Ravidas, what is his name? One Sikh guru who came from the lower caste. So he is the main guru, which means new gods or new gurudwaras. Okay, I gave one example of Madigas in Andhra Pradesh. Madigas example is not from Dipankar Gupta. That's what I observed. Madigas are creating a myth like they are from Jambavanta. Jambavanta was associated with mythical story both in Ramayana and Mahabharata. So we were from Jambavanta, and so going for making him as a deity. So this kind of myth making, going for different temples, different books, this is changing the religion. Okay, this is not like Sanskritization, because in Sanskritization you are emulating the dominant caste, whereas here it is not an emulation, rather it is an assertion. Assertion. This is one very important change that is going on in the caste. Earlier in the caste system, people were trying to move up, Sanskritization and moving up. But now it is not moving up. It is assertion, we are like this, and critiquing the hierarchy. Critiquing the hierarchy. Assertion. and even in the forms of religion. For example, Ambedkarite Buddhism itself is a case of assertion. One may say it is a different religion, but I think Hindus will say finally that's also a part of Hinduism. That's their nature. We can't help them. So they will take it as a kind of an assertion. Okay. Even Ambedkar as a god, assertion. So this is about various forms of religious assertion. The difference between assertion and emulation is that in emulation, we are like you and you please recognize that. In assertion, we are not like you, we are different and we will be different and we are not inferior to you. Okay. At one time we might have been, but now we are not. So we are not going to be like you and so you respect. No, we are going to be different and we are different and we will be. So what Dipankar Gupta says is that in the caste system, hierarchy is diluted, but assertions and identities are up. Assertions are up, hierarchy down. Now tell me, if assertion is up and hierarchy down, does it mean caste system being there or caste system weakened or caste system increased?
Weekend?
Caste system weakened. Caste system weakened. That is what is happening. So caste system is not like caste consciousness. People don't make distinction between caste consciousness and caste system or caste hierarchy. Now, caste consciousness is being used to undermine hierarchy. That is what is meant by using caste to fight caste system. Using caste means use caste consciousness. But to do what? To undermine hierarchy. This is the strategy, which means caste identities are being accepted, but caste hierarchy being rejected. Tell me, if the hierarchy is completely gone, then will you say caste system still remains or caste system is gone? Suppose the entire hierarchy is gone and a mala is only a mala, but on par with a Brahmin. But mala is a mala, Brahmin is a Brahmin. So mala knows mala, Brahmin knows he is Brahmin. But there is no hierarchy at all. Then tell me, do you say in such a situation, do you say caste system is there, a caste system is not there?
So from marriage point of view, endogamy will continue.
Exactly. Endogamy will continue. So endogamy will continue. Otherwise, endogamy will continue. So will you say caste system still there or not there?
Yes, sir, still there. Marriage is I think it is an important aspect.
So no, you are talking about malas, Brahmins. Malas remain as malas, Brahmins remain as Brahmins. But Brahmins don't dominate. Malas and Brahmins are equals. But malas remain as malas and Brahmins remain as Brahmins. Which means they are endogamous units. Suppose we reach that position. Will you say India still has caste system? Deepika, why don't you answer this question for me?
Sir, as long as the marriages are endogamous, we can say that it exists.
Oh.
Caste system as such exists. Hierarchy may vary.
Hierarchy?
May vary.
Hierarchy doesn't exist. We're bringing equality. So hierarchy doesn't exist, but caste system exists. If hierarchy doesn't exist, then will you say that the caste system is a kind of stratification?
Yes, sir.
How? Suppose Brahmins and suppose there are only two castes and Brahmins and malas. Brahmins and malas exist, but they're not hierarchically arranged. Then will you say it is a system of stratification?
They have identities.
But what is stratification?
It is different layers and levels.
So then if they are equal, can you say they still have layers?
They are all in the same level.
So are there layers then?
No.
That's all. Which means caste identity can exist, but not as a system of stratification. This is the ideological justification for using a caste in politics. That is what Kanshiram is saying. If you want to destroy caste through intermarriage, please go ahead. But you are not doing it right. So we bring equality across castes. And when we bring equality across castes, the domination ends, hierarchy ends, then it no longer becomes a system of stratification, no longer a source of exploitation. As good as getting rid of it, you will say it's simply a kind of ethnicity. Difference between ethnicity and stratification is that ethnic groups hierarchically arranged is stratification. If they are not hierarchically arranged, that is not stratification. How is stratification defined? Unequal access of groups. Unequal access of groups to three variables: economy, status, and power. If groups have unequal access in terms of these three variables, economy, power, and status, that is stratification. On the other hand, if groups exist but they don't have unequal access, then that is not stratification. Blacks and whites constitute stratification in America because whites are inferior in power and status and economy. If blacks and whites are equal, then you don't call it stratification. So caste system is defined as a kind of stratification. Caste system is different castes having unequal access. But if the castes are there and they do not have unequal access, then caste system is no longer a system of stratification. Suppose we reach Kammas are equal, Malas are equal, but within Kammas there are classes. Within Malas there are classes. What does it mean? Then we mean we have class basis of stratification and no caste basis of caste stratification. Malas and Kammas are equal, but there are classes within Malas, there are classes within Kammas, which means India has class as a basis of stratification and not caste, because caste-wise they are all equal.
Sir, doesn't these two parts go against each other? I mean, if we are looking at classes within a caste, and then we are again saying that caste would be equal, so aren't they contradicting in itself?
Which means normal methods of stratification are there. I mean, what is the contradiction?
Sir,
I mean,
within
that may not be a real possibility. That may not be a real possibility. Suppose caste, I mean, what is the question? Maybe you need to be more clear, or I need to understand.
Sir, I'm saying we are talking about equality, and equality in terms of classes, status, and power, everything.
No. To the caste.
To the caste, right? Let's say to the caste. So let's say there are two castes, and they are equal.
They're equal.
And okay, in everything they are equal. But in one caste there are another classes, and in another caste there is some classes. So
yes,
that means they are not equal. I mean, how do we justify that?
No. People are not equal. People are not equal. There are classes, but castes only are equal.
It's a castes are made up of people.
That is true, but within a caste you have rich people, poor people, and middle class. Rich Malas are there, poor Malas are there. Rich Brahmins are there, poor Brahmins are there. Which means castes are equal. Presently that is not the case. Presently, very few Malas are rich and many are poor. very few kamma are poor. So you can say kammas are better than malas.
So
But
maybe
suppose
this is an idealistic model.
we are, at least, I mean, that is to say class-based stratification will be there, caste-based stratification gone. It is like that. But this kind of a argument is the justification for using caste in politics. Because the argument is, if you are for intercaste marriage, get rid of caste. That's fine. You are not doing it. When you are not doing it, bring equality. Which means use caste consciousness to destroy hierarchy. So when malas become equal to Brahmins, it just doesn't matter. Malas are no longer inferior. Then the caste system is not a problem. Which means people are conscious of caste, but when there is no hierarchy and there is no domination, that is not a problem at all. It is like that. What is the position of Kammas and Reddys? They are not really hierarchically arranged. So like that, other castes also become like that. So that is the argument in favor of using caste. Okay, so that is the way to look at it. And now Dipankar Gupta is saying, as of now, such a thing is happening. In fact, in India, classes are becoming more important. Caste hierarchy is down. Classes are becoming more important. And classes are emerging within a caste. Within Dalits, rich Dalits. And within Brahmins, very poor Brahmins. Which means classes are emerging within the caste. And caste inequalities reduced. Caste inequalities reduced and inequalities within the caste increasing. But at one time, caste inequalities were more and there used to be more homogeneity within a caste. All Dalits used to be very poor. All Dalits used to be poor, untouchables. But now, some are very rich and some remain very poor. Many remain poor. So, which means class is becoming more important, caste is becoming less important. And within the caste, let us always make a distinction between two dimensions, whether it is caste hierarchy or caste consciousness. Caste consciousness increase does not mean caste hierarchy increase. No. Caste consciousness can increase, but caste hierarchy can come down. Okay, don't equate casteism with only caste consciousness. Caste consciousness is one thing, caste hierarchy is one thing. And if we are critical of caste system, we are not really critical of caste consciousness. We are critical of caste domination, caste hierarchy, exploitation, and untouchability. Okay, the problem of caste system is not between Kammas and Reddys. It is between Kammas and Reddys versus Dalits. The issue is of hierarchy. They are not an issue of unity. Issue is of hierarchy. Issue is not of endogamy. It is about hierarchy. So if hierarchy is getting diluted, if lower castes are getting opportunities to grow, then the caste system is not a problem. So we need to understand very clearly what is happening to the caste system, what is happening to the consciousness, what is happening to the hierarchy. Most people agree that consciousness may be rising or on the same, but hierarchy is getting diluted, which is very, very, very clearly a positive development. You can take it as a very clear conclusion, like in the case of gender, woman empowerment is a positive and real, and very, very important aspect of social change. The same thing you can say about caste also, positive, real, and very important. So you can take gender and caste combined, you can take that there are two important changes that took place in India. Lower caste empowerment and gender empowerment. We may say this is not enough, that is a different issue. But huge changes took place in these two dimensions. And this is a part of democratization. because this is a pursuit of liberty, equality, liberty of the people who have been oppressed. Okay, so gender and caste are very clear, sweeping, defining, unambiguous, and positive changes in Indian society. Okay. So caste assertion is different from Sanskritization. So what is going on is assertion. Assertion. Okay. So,
Sir, one more thing.
please.
Sir, is there anything like desanskritization also?
Desanskritization, but we have one common word for that, that is westernization. We don't need desanskritization, that is westernization.
No, sir. I mean, I read it that some Brahmins,
Hmm.
to avail the benefit of reservation, they are not claiming that they are Brahmins. So it's like a desanskritization. I mean, I might be wrong, but I
No,
somewhere read it.
maybe there is one such concept, but I did not read. No idea. No idea.
I
If
didn't.
somebody, just one second, if somebody has used it with a purpose to say something else, I have no idea. But in the context of M.N. Srinivas, he needed only two concepts: Sanskritization, Westernization. So if somebody is doing something to look backward, maybe you need a concept. I don't know. But if there is any such concept, you can post to me.
Sir, I read it in some book. That's why.
If you have come across, you can post it to me, or I will see. But I didn't read it. Okay. See, as of now, I don't know about desanskritization, but groups are claiming lower Varna, OBC reservation. But I don't know if they're doing it after emulation of something. I have not heard of it. Okay, because remember, Sanskritization is emulation, not the claim. Remember, I made this distinction. Sanskritization is not the claim. Sanskritization is emulation to make a claim. Sanskritization refers to change of lifestyle with an intention to make a claim. I don't think if anybody is changing the lifestyle of the lower caste to make a claim. I haven't come across that. Okay, they are making a claim is true, but they are not making a claim after changing the lifestyle. I don't think so. But if anybody has used it, then we will see if there is any purpose in it. Okay. But otherwise, Sanskritization is about lifestyle change and not the emulation, not the claim. Okay. If you have anything, we'll discuss. Next. Tell me, what else do you think are your observations from Deepankar Gupta's article? I think now you can write what is the impact, something like impact of globalization and urbanization on Indian village, isn't it? Let us take some questions. Okay, for example, give a critical analysis of Andrew studies Tanjavur village. Okay, okay, take this. Discuss Andrew's account of the relationship between the relationship between caste, class, and power as a change from symmetrical to asymmetrical one. Discuss Andrew Whitley's account of relationship between caste, class, and power as a change from symmetrical to asymmetrical one. is caste system changing, weakening, disintegrating in India? The second question. So answer these questions. So what is meant by symmetrical to asymmetrical one?
All three dimension in particular class.
In symmetrical case, all three, one. Landlords had economic power, political power, and status. But now, asymmetrical, divergence. So just explain Andrew's case of Sripura. That's all. Very straightforward. This question, what is your conclusion? Is caste system changing, weakening, and disintegrating in India? What would be your conclusion?
Weakening plus asserting.
No, across these three words: changing, weakening, and disintegrating.
Changing and weakening.
Exactly. I think we can say changing and weakening. Disintegrating is not true because caste is very much there. Changing and weakening. Hierarchy is weakening and caste assertions, new forms, caste system is changing. Changing and weakening rather than disintegrating. Okay. And you use all these studies, you all link.
Sir, one question.
Please.
Sir, what is the structure and cultural theories of caste? How do we go about it?
Structural
and cultural. I mean, I could only think of the stratification for structural and cultural, the pollution norms, but nothing beyond it.
Okay, let us discuss that. Structural and cultural features of caste. See, basically, okay, here some words, clarity over some words. Structure refers to units and the relationship. We discussed M.N. Srinivas approach is structural functional approach. Structural functionalism, structure refers to, I'll tell you another way of looking at structure. Body structure is simply, I mean, when you take an X-ray of the body, what do you get? Bones and the parts and the relationship. You take that as the structure. Structure is like relationship across. So structure of the caste system, hierarchy, varna, all these things. Culture, the way he used the culture refers to behavior, various practices. So various features of caste system, you can take it as culture. Practice of untouchability, gods, rituals, Brahminism, all these things are cultural aspects. And then, so in that sense, what is Sanskritization? Cultural emulation of the people who are structurally high. I'm just using the words. Cultural emulation of the people who are structurally high. Brahmins are structurally high. Dominant castes are structurally high. By those who are structurally low. Structure is about parts and the relationship. So you can take it as structural and cultural features of the caste. So that's about Andrew Whitley. We'll see questions on village studies. Okay. Significance of village studies. Write short notes. Significance of village studies. Tell me, how are village studies important? What is a village study? Study of village in detail. Andrew Betley case is a village study. Tell me, why do we have to study village? Because Indian society is revealed. Don't you think through discussion of Indian village, we saw the changes in Indian society? So village is giving a very clear account of what it was before and how it has changed now. So it is a mirror of social change. You can take a comparative account. It was and it is. What happened? And anyway, one word Dipankar Gupta uses is oligarchy. Okay, oligarchy means a few families in a village dominating economy. Oligarchy. Families in a village. That is about oligarchy. Okay. Of course, there are villages where one landlord had everything. That is not oligarchy. But in certain villages, there are few families, 2-3 families. You can call them oligarchies. So you give Andrew's account and then say how this helps.
Is it fair to claim that village society changed at a slower pace than the urban society?
Sure, very much. Village society changes at a slower pace, no doubt. And you also see that village society is changing not when it is left to itself, but through outside forces. That is another thing. How did India's villages change? Land reforms, again outside. Population growth, outside. Health facilities improvement. Panchayat Raj, outside. Liberalization, globalization, outside. In fact, India's villages are changed because they are subjected to pressures from outside. Everything that is responsible for Indian village change is coming from outside, including the British rule. British rule changed Indian village, but how did it change? Outside forces, cash crops, cash economy. Okay. So do you see that looking at an Indian village is a way of looking at Indian society? And what is town? People migrating from the village. Landlords constituted a new class there. Upper caste constituted a new classes there. So villages are getting transformed. Villages are providing recruitment. Okay. And then they're being transformed. So looking at an Indian village is a way to look at Indian society, to understand Indian society. And Indian villages change very slowly, very slowly. And because they change slowly, we are in a position to understand Indian society's past. Okay. It is like that. So what is the idea of Indian village? What is the idea of Indian village? You can explain what is a village. You can explain what was its past, present, and future. And in a question like this, you Look at all aspects: caste, class, economy, religion, all aspects, right? Holistically. And then tell me, uh, what are different ideologies associated with Indian village? Whom can you quote when you are writing about ideologies of what should be and what it is? We discussed two people who had strong views on village.
So Gandhi is one.
Gandhi and Ambedkar. What Gandhi wanted and what Ambedkar wanted. Many times you just look at Gandhi Ambedkar triangle, Gandhi Ambedkar angle in caste or religion or village. Okay. Two contrasting perspectives they provide.
Sir, we understood that technology creates more classes. So if we go to the village scenario, it is not creating classes because of technology, because people are anyways moving out. So do we say technology doesn't have an effect on the village in
No,
creating the classes?
technology is it is because of technology only you have a lot of non-farm employment now. Technology is bringing urbanization. For example, he talked about food processing related. All that is technology.
So,
Technology helps.
so that would be outside the village. I'm saying within the village.
Within the village also, employment can shift. For example, if a village that is growing apples is connected to food processing, isn't the employment within the village changes?
Yeah, true, correct.
That's what Deepankar Gupta is talking about. Non-farm employment within the village is changing. Why is it so? They're connected to the towns and cities. And more importantly, those who go out have cash, remember, they have money. And so even when they come back or they're sending money to the people in the village, then something else grows within the village also. For example, how come there are so many shops in the village now? It means people have money. Where is that money coming from? Outside. In an isolated stage, there was no money also, right? It's all barter. That's why consumption increased even at the village level. So when urbanization, industrialization takes place, it is not confined to towns and cities. And do you see, as I said in the notes, urbanization is not about cities and towns. Urbanization is about non-agricultural employment. Shift from agriculture to non-agriculture is urbanization. Okay. A town represents, do you know how town and city are defined? They're defined at something called town on the percentage of non-agricultural population. Something is called a town on the percentage of non-agricultural population. Something is a village on the percentage of non-agricultural population. And after the towns, cities and mega cities, that is about the number of people in that particular place. So the primary criteria to call something a town is non-agricultural occupation. So non-agricultural population gives income, undermines Judge money system, empowers the lower caste more. Okay. So these are two ways. One, the earlier dominant down in variety of ways, and the dominated up in variety of ways. So economy is bringing so many changes. Okay. So idea of Indian village is a very general question. You can discuss various factors that 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 explain what it was and what it is now. Some questions are from modern India, which we will do later. What will you write under this? Anti-Brahminical movements during the colonial period. Whom will you discuss? Anti-Brahminical movements during the colonial period. Periyar, Phule.
So Narayan Guru will be there.
Narayana Guru. Next, Satyasodak movement of Phule. What all we discussed? Phule as an agrarian radical. We discussed. Some questions are on modern India, which you can do and or we will discuss later. Okay, this you do in GS, but let us discuss. What is affirmative action? Substantiate theoretical positions on affirmative action with examples. What is affirmative action? Substantiate theoretical positions on affirmative action with examples. Oh. So tell me, what is an affirmative action? What is the common name for this affirmative action?
Reservation.
Reservations. Technical name for reservations is affirmative action. What is another name for reservations? Positive discrimination. Positive discrimination. Discriminating positively. That's called positive discrimination. So affirmative action, positive discrimination. So what are the theoretical positions? What is the justification? Number one, they have been unequally treated in the society. We believe in equality, so undoing the inequality. Undoing the equality. Undoing the inequality. Okay. What does 15 clause 4 say? Reservations in education. 16 clause 4, reservations in jobs. Tell me, 15 says equality and 15.4. 16 gives equality and 16.4. Why is it like that? Are the exceptions? People would say, Supreme Court said, they are not real exceptions. They are ways of realizing equality. Okay. So society is discriminating, and to bring equality, we are positively discriminating. So Supreme Court said they are the instances of equality. 15.4 is an instance. 15.4 is a way of implementing 15. 16.4 is a way of implementing 16. 16.4 is not an exception to 16. 15.4 is not an exception to 15. So this is the theory behind affirmative action. Affirmative action is not discrimination. Affirmative action is trying to reduce the discrimination. Okay. So bringing equality, because otherwise they are unequal. Or putting differently, treating unequals unequally. Treating equals equally, unequals unequally. You can't put one rule for two unequals. Then the better off will use that rule. Reservations is a way of bringing equality. If the same criteria is used for two different people, definitely that criteria to whom it is beneficial, he will get it. So without any reservations, upper caste only would make it. But with reservations, lower caste can make it. So you are creating a situation where the lower caste can. All that is part of equality. All that is a part of equality. That is what is meant by affirmative action, positive discrimination. These are not anti-equality clauses. These are ways of promoting equality. And another argument for theoretical argument is that representation in bureaucracy. Representation in legislature, representation in bureaucracy, representation in various occupations. Why is representation needed? That makes the system sensitive to the people. A Dalit officer is definitely more likely to be sensitive to Dalit issues. He will be naturally sensitive, whereas an upper caste person has to be compassionate to be sensitive. A Dalit officer will naturally be sensitive because he will think that he is one among them. It comes naturally to him. Okay. So, representation angle to improve the quality of administration is one, and equality angle is another. So these are the theoretical positions of affirmative action. What happens? What is the result of it? Hugely beneficial. But let me tell you, when it was first offered, Dalit reservations, very few could make use of because there was no enough of educational attainment. So top level posts were represented only by the upper caste. Only recent years, we don't know, I'll tell you the exact data. Only recent years, upper class of services are getting filled as proportionate to the lower caste population. Getting increasingly over the years, but not in the beginning. For many years, upper services and higher positions were held only by upper caste. So which means it took many decades for reservations to truly give somewhat representative character at all levels. So in the beginning, at lowest levels, it became representative, but then higher level. It took a lot of time for the highest level to be representative. We have to know the exact figures of Dalits in IAS. We'll find out. Okay. If Dalits in IAS are proportionate to their population, then it became representative. But for many years, it was not at all. Because representation, the affirmative is only a provision. How far it can actually be used and how many people will use and how many people will finally become is a different issue. Because there was not enough of education. Okay, so it was a positive step, but on the whole, we can judge that this is a hugely important step that helped the lower caste. There is absolutely no doubt about it. Okay. So if you need any reforms, so the reforms should be in the class-based criteria, so that the poorer Dalits would make a better use of the reservations. Okay, Nikhil, you want to say something?
Sir, I just wanted to ask. So the reservation is fixed on at every level, right? Like for
at every level, it is fixed. But how will one be an IAS officer? He has to be a graduate first, has to clear the exam. And how many graduates are there among Dalits? It is like that. So like that, very few people could make it, and finally they could reach this position of this much percentage. So it was taking many years.
For many years, that seat was filled by the other upper caste.
Upper caste only.
Like the vacant seat.
Yes, yes. Filled with upper caste. And also percentage means including the previous people also, right? Including the previous people. So it took some time to be representative. So class D, lowest class got representative first, and then the higher classes. We are yet to know about the highest position. So that is about it, caste. So there will be few questions which we can do later. So get ready for the test.